So recently I decided to dive headfirst into every album by The Doors, all the way from their psychedelic breakthrough debut album to their post-Morrison epilogue, and I gotta say, it was quite a trip. At times their discography was transcendent, sometimes messy, occasionally circus-like, but undeniably influential. What I found was a band constantly evolving, sometimes stumbling, and ultimately leaving behind one of the most fascinating catalogs in rock history. I listened to each album by The Doors a minimum of 3 times across multiple forms of audio. Here's what I discovered. First was their self-titled debut album from 1967. Their debut album is quintessential Doors, moody, hypnotic, and undeniably of its time. Break On Through and Light My Fire aren't just album highlights, they're part of rock history. But the album also shows its age, especially in the dry, boxy production that makes even the most dynamic tracks feel slightly restrained. It hurts Light My Fire more than anything, a track that should explode sonically but instead feels slightly muted. Then there's Alabama Song, which lands like a sideshow act wandered into the studio, being lyrically outdated and kind of musically jarring. It's easily the weakest moment here, but elsewhere Morrison's confidence and vision are magnetic. There's a surreal coolness coursing through this album, and despite a few missteps, it's still a strong opening statement. I decided to give this one 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire.
Their second album was called Strange Days, also from 1967. Coming out just months after their debut album, Strange Days refines the Doors sound without losing their edge. Their production is clearer, crisper, and more confident. Tracks like Love Me Two Times showcase a slick blues influence, while Your Lost Little Girl carries once again slightly problematic lyrics, but brilliant guitar work. Morrison's vocal performance on People Are Strange stands out as one of his best. He channels old school cabaret vibes with an eerie ease. I Can't See Your Face in My Mind features tasteful, minimalist bass work, while the closer, When the Music's Over, is an absolute triumph. It's long, unpredictable, and hypnotic. The kind of track only the Doors could pull off. Morrison, just 23 years old at this time, sounds like a seasoned veteran, and the band's chemistry clicks on nearly every track. This album is one that I decided to give 4 out of 5 stars.
When the music's over, turn out the light, turn out the light.
The next album we're talking about is Waiting for the Sun from 1968. The Doors' third album opened strong with Hello, I Love You, one of their most accessible tracks. Unfortunately, the album rarely hits that same level again. Love Street and Wintertime Love feel too simple and lightweight, lacking the bite that defined earlier work. Summer's Almost Gone is a mid-album gem, melancholic and haunting, but elsewhere hooks are sparse and the energy is inconsistent. The album still sounds like the Doors, but it's missing that extra something, a sense of ambition or danger. It's a perfectly decent album, but you can feel the creative momentum beginning to wobble. Because of all this, I'm just giving this one 3 out of 5 stars.
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game.
Next up is The Soft Parade from 1969. This is where things get a little weird, in both good and bad ways. The Soft Parade feels like a band at odds with itself. You've got orchestral arrangements, country influences, and over-polished production trying to wrap itself around its wild core. Shaman's Blues has some fantastic off-kilter guitar work that sounds like it's bouncing off alley walls, but then you get something like Easy Ride, which could pass as filler from a Johnny Cash B-side. The album's biggest weakness is that it often sounds like the Doors playing dress-up, imitating other styles without fully making them their own. Wild Child offers a glimpse of their raw energy, but tracks like Runnin' Blue drag things down with hokey arrangements that just feel forced. Once again, my ratings are in a downward direction here, as I can only give this one 2.5 out of 5 stars.
Not your mother's or your father's child, our child.
The next album we're talking about is Morrison Hotel from 1970. After a shaky experiment from the previous album, Morrison Hotel roars back with clarity and grit. The opener, Roadhouse Blues, is a barroom brawler of a track that sets the tone perfectly. There's a sense of urgency and swagger here that had gone missing. The track Waiting for the Sun, oddly appearing here and not on the album of the same name, delivers with a thunderous rhythm and commanding vocal style. While You Make Me Real doesn't quite hit the mark vocally, it's more of a stylistic misfire than a deal breaker. Peace Frog Blue Sunday is a highlight of the album, combining dark lyrical imagery with a surprising emotional payoff. The Spy feels like it was made to mesmerize a live audience, and Indian Summer reveals a softer, almost spiritual side of the band. It's a dynamic, rejuvenated album that proves the Doors still had plenty left in the tank. For this album, I'm going back up to 4 out of 5 stars.
I'll keep you out on the road you have
Next up is LA Woman, released in 1971. This is the last album with Jim Morrison, and it plays out as both a goodbye and a rebirth. The Changeling kicks things off with an infectious energy, while Love Her Madly dances around a brilliant bass line, even if the vocals are mixed too quietly. Been Down So Long stands out with a snarling guitar solo that wouldn't feel out of place in Jack White's future discography. The title track chugs along like a long desert drive, hypnotic but perhaps overstays its welcome just a bit. A few tracks feel like blues rock standards that you've heard before, but then comes Riders on the Storm, closing the album with a spectral elegance. It's cool, contemplative, and feels like the perfect ending to Jim Morrison's arc. To rate this album, it narrowly missed out on being another 4-star effort, but I'm keeping it at 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown.
So a quick note before we move on to the next album on my list. Tragically, on July 3rd, 1971, Jim Morrison passed away at the age of 27. But following the critical and commercial success of LA Woman, the surviving members of The Doors continued as a trio to record their 7th album. Reflecting on this album in 2021, Robbie Krieger noted the band's difficulty to continue working after Morrison's death, saying the following: "It was a tough time, of course. When Jim was gone, we had kept going. The three of us were practicing all the time, writing new stuff, but when Jim passed, we said, geez, what are we gonna do? We could just give it up, or, we have all these songs, let's go in and record and see what happens. We probably shouldn't have put it out that quick after Jim's passing, but we just felt like it was all that we could do. We could have sat around and been depressed, which we were, but I don't know, the record company, Elektra, they were wanting us to continue. It wasn't that hard of a decision." So next up was the album titled Other Voices from 1971. Without Morrison, The Doors understandably struggled to define themselves. Other Voices feels like a different band entirely, and not just because of the new vocals. Tracks like Ships with Sails lean into jazz territory, stretching out longer than they need to. The vocals throughout feel forced and almost pirate-like at times, and they lack Jim Morrison's magnetism. Tightrope Ride tries to fill the frontman void with enthusiasm, but it doesn't quite land. Down on the Farm begins with promise but derails into theatrical oddity. The instrumentation is still solid, and the piano work often shines, but it's not enough to lift the songwriting. It's an uneven effort, weighed down by a lack of direction. I didn't enjoy this one very much, so I'm just keeping it at 2 out of 5 stars. The final album in the Doors' discography is Full Circle from 1972. Surprisingly, Full Circle is a modest step up from Other Voices. While it never reaches the band's early heights, it still feels somewhat cohesive and comfortable. It doesn't aim high, and maybe that's why it works better. The first couple of tracks are forgettable, but Vertilac breaks through with an eerie, snake-charming vibe that catches your attention. The Mosquito leans into its weirdness, and somehow I don't mind it. But the Piano Bird is where the band finally clicks. Robbie Krieger's vocals carry a smoothness that feels both fresh and grounded, almost reminiscent of Jim James from My Morning Jacket. This album is a respectable swan song, unremarkable but not embarrassing. I'm giving Full Circle 3 out of 5 stars.
I'm gonna hang on your neck just like a Vertilac. I'll take you for a ride in my Cadillac.
So what did I find after listening to every Doors album? A band that started with fire, got a little lost in the fog, and somehow managed to find clarity again, at least before Morrison's tragic ending. Their early albums were daring and original, their later albums were hit or miss, and the post-Morrison work, while passable, felt like ghost echoes of what the band once was. So throughout this video, I was offering my ratings for each album on a 5-star scale, but I also wanted to share my overall rankings now that I'm done with this experience. My favorite album by The Doors was Strange Days, followed up by Morrison Hotel at number 2. My third favorite Doors album was their self-titled debut album. At number 4 was LA Woman. Number 5, Waiting for the Sun. Number 6 was Full Circle. Number 7 was The Soft Parade. And number 8, Other Voices. Before I give my closing thoughts on The Doors, if you enjoyed this video and want to watch more content like this, subscribe here to Last Few Spins and also drop a like on this video, as that really helps the algorithm know to push this video to more music lovers such as ourselves. By the way, my name is Joe, and I sincerely appreciate you hanging out with me here for a few minutes. But now to offer my closing thoughts on The Doors. The Doors weren't just a band, they felt like a moment in time. And while not every moment aged well, when they hit, they really hit. Listening to all their albums chronologically gave me a deeper appreciation for their risks, their poetry, and the chaos that they embraced. I still don't understand what was going on with some of the more circusy songs, but hey, that's just part of the ride, and I'm glad that I've now experienced this legendary band.